I'm Thorsten Lorenz. I work for NodeSource. These are my handles, TH Lorenz everywhere. And I came from Cheyenne, Wyoming in my Subaru. And it took me a month. Actually, a little more than a month. You're like, oh, what's that, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever. Well, I took the scenic route. I went to Canada and hiked there in Jasper and Banff, Montana, everywhere. And why am I showing this? Well, I want to make you jealous. So here are some nice pictures. And well, I don't only want to make you jealous. It's kind of my case here too. If you're working remote, who's working remotely?
I work 1 day remotely.
Okay, so if you work remotely, go travel. If you don't work remotely, start working remotely and then go travel. Obviously, that doesn't work for everyone. Some people have a family, but I can just highly recommend it. I've been doing this for like 3 years now, just like being all over the place and seeing the world, either traveling in my car or just going to South America, living there. So I highly recommend it, and I'm very grateful that NodeSource gives me the opportunity to do that. However, my talk doesn't have like too much to do with what I'm doing at NodeSource, somewhat. Oh, so this is not nice. I think this is better, right? Okay, so at NodeSource, as was said, I work mostly with kind of node internals. I work with V8. I look at debuggability, diagnostics, and stuff like that. But at the same time, when we go to clients and try to help them, it kind of helps if I understand what they're actually doing, right? So if I get totally removed, and I'm not even aware of what's going on in the ecosystem anymore, that's not good either. So in that sense, it has to do with NodeSource. And so basically, I'm always looking for opportunities to find some fun project to play around with something totally different than what I'm doing at work. And that's what I'm going to show today. So basically, web apps progressive web apps kind of hit the scene a few years ago. And I kind of read what they are. So it says like applications built using web technologies, blah, 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 maybe used on mobile devices and the desktop. And I was like, wow, OK, so that's kind of cool. I was like, this is good. I mean, do we finally write it once and it runs everywhere? Like, this has been promised to us like a lot of times before, right? Also with that language that's missing the script in the end. So this is finally not a lie. So I had to find out. And the only way to really find out is to build something real, right? You can't just build like some little to-do list and then say, OK, I tried it, it works. You have to actually build a real project. And so my other passion is actually playing poker. And what fascinates me there is like the strategy and so on. So I've decided I'm going to build a poker app that works on the phone and it works on the desktop and everywhere. And I'm going to see how this actually works. So in order for this talk to make sense, we'll have to learn about poker first. So who plays poker? OK, so only a few of you. So I'm going to explain a little bit about poker first. So this is a table with, by the way, this is also a web app that I built. This is a table. You have a bunch of people. And this is like the hold'em form of poker. Everyone only gets 2 cards. So in this case, our hero got king and 10. So now basically this is a pre-flop scenario where everyone decides if they like their 2 cards or not, and if they want to even bet or not. Happy Jack didn't like his cards. He folded. And then true, he decided, OK, well, actually, I have really, really good cards. I don't want to just like pay the 100 that I have to pay. I want to actually raise the stakes. And he raises, or she. We don't know. And the other players all fold. And the hero here, the pot now has like about 500 something in there, and he only has to add 150 more to play, and that's a good investment, so he plays. And now comes the flop cards, and those are called community cards, so everyone shares them. So basically, the hand of each player now is their 2 cards combined with these 3 cards, right? So in this case, the hero, for instance, has a pair of kings, right? And that's actually pretty good, but he's missing a kicker, so the 10 is kind of not a really good card to have with that king. So like, you know, if someone has a king queen, king jack, beats them ace king. So hero decides to check, and true actually bets. So that kind of signals either he's bluffing or he's got a good hand. And now comes into play, like we have maybe watched that play before. We have seen that player makes a lot of sense, plays straight ahead, only bets when he's got good cards. So we're assuming that, OK, maybe he's got something. But we also got something, so we're going to call. And now comes an 8. And that's kind of dangerous for both players because if anyone bet with a second pair, meaning like they had 2 8s, now they got 3 8s, right? So that's kind of a tricky situation there. Here he decides to check again. That true also checks maybe because he doesn't have the 8, and he's kind of not afraid that it gets sketchy. Wants to play safe. Now the 4 of club came in. Now we can see there are 3 clubs there. So if anyone has 2 clubs in their hand, they got a flush. So it's kind of tricky a little bit. Here he decides to check again, doesn't want to invest too much. And now the true bets again, and that's kind of odd. So we kind of must think now that he's probably got a good hand, and hero pays him off. And I'm not going to show what that true actually had. I just showed this to introduce the next thing, which is the app that I built. So this is betterpoker.net, and by the way, since this is about progressive web apps, right? We don't need the freaking internet. It's right there, right? We don't need it. What I'm going to show is like this hand basically. That we just looked at came from playing online somewhere. And it's basically written to your hard drive in this kind of format. And then we can copy that. And we can just paste it into the app that I built. And then here we see a summary of the same thing we just saw in an animation, right? And now we can say, OK, let's try to analyze, try to figure out what the opponent would have, right? So here we got the possible ranges, starting ranges. We can also obviously modify with a percent slider here. We can do all kinds of stuff. But basically, we're trying to figure out what kind of possible cards do we give him at the preflop when he raised. So we can say, OK, he played straight forward, and he raised. So let's start with this range. And then basically now, we're looking at the flop, came in, king 8-6, and now we can see, like, in this range, how did he hit the flop? Also, by the way, here, we have a web worker that's running in the background, so you can see kind of, it starts working, and it keeps correcting itself, so it's trying to calculate how good our winning chances are against that range. And now, basically, we can say, OK, he bets, so he must be strong. So we can say, let's select all the strong hands. By the way, this also works on a phone. Just to show that, and we're going to probably show that a little more. But basically, I can do the same thing here. I can have pop-ups coming up, and so on. So we'll get into that more later. But basically, now I'm assuming that he has strong hands. I'm going to say that from the flush draws, I'm going to remove some. The queen jack, you probably wouldn't bet that strongly. So I remove that. And then I go on to the turn, which was the next card that came, that 8. And now I can say that, OK, actually, he's pretty strong with all the hands. But what would he check with? So let's just say he's playing all the hands. Which hands would he not check with? So you definitely would probably bet if he had 4 of a kind, meaning like he had like 8s, like 4 8s. He would probably bet that. And a full house, he would probably also bet. So we're assuming that now we already narrowed it down to this. And now we look at the river, and we're saying, OK, at this river, he's only strong. And basically, we can see that all the hands beat us. So now we can say, OK, maybe we shouldn't have paid him off, right? Maybe we shouldn't have paid that final bet. Maybe we could have saved ourselves that money. That's the whole idea of the app, that you basically narrow down. Like here we have 28 left, and we started with a range of like 137. So we narrowed down more and more what our opponents could hold, not exactly the 2 cards, but kind of to help us make the decision. The idea is that you practice that, like you review your hands that you played, you practice that, and then when you're really actually playing, you have practice in how to analyze those hands. So, and that's basically the progressive web app that I built. OK, so I'm actually going to have to make this smaller. I hope everyone, if you can't see it, let me know, but this works better. So let's talk about like what actually are progressive web apps. So first of all, the name already says they are progressive. Well, what does that mean? That means that if someone with a really low-end phone that can't even run JavaScript, if they go to like the New York Times, which also has maybe a video, he should at least be able to see the text. He should be able to read the news. Maybe the video doesn't start playing. OK, that's fine. And then for someone who has a JavaScript enabled, maybe then the video starts playing. So like you keep enhancing given the features that your clients have. In our case, since this is an app, it doesn't make much sense to do anything if there's no JavaScript, right? But it depends on the scenario. Responsive means basically that it works on any form factor. Like, if you can actually see here, if I start resizing this, it will adapt itself. So for instance, now the hand, paste hand came into a pop-up. The ranges also went to a pop-up. If I make that bigger, it becomes a sidebar, because that makes sense. So it kind of adjusts itself to the scenario. And here we can see in the phone, it only fits one matrix, and we can then slide through them like that, right? So that's what responsiveness is. Work offline, we kind of see that I'm offline, right? And we'll see in a second there will be a link that will click and it will work. And the idea is that you're trying to give at least the best experience that you can while the user is offline. So obviously, if you're a news site, you cannot show the next news. Like the user didn't get them yet, but maybe he wants to read the article or finish reading the article he started reading yesterday, and now he's offline, and you should probably have cached that article. And we're going to see like how you can make that actually work. It should be app-like, meaning that it should feel like an app. For instance, like in the phone, I can swipe like left and right and so on. It should be as close as possible to what the users are used to on the device, right? It shouldn't suddenly be, oh, this is a web app, and now I'm going to have to think totally different. Everything works differently. It shouldn't be like that. Fresh means like kind of like how I said in the news site that if I go to New York Times or whatever, and I'm offline, it only can show me the old articles, but the moment that I go online, it should update and give me the newer ones, right? And that in the case of the app, I want to always give the newer version of the app. Safe means that you want to make sure that no one can like listen in to the traffic. Mainly this means like you should use HTTPS. And it should be installable. So basically that means that if I go to the app on my phone a lot of times, what it does actually, it gives us the screen where you can say, okay, do you want to add this to your home screen? And when you do that, now you actually have an icon, and you can just click it, and it feels like an app. You're not even aware anymore that it was a web page. And it's also discoverable that way because you can have the icon right there, right? So that's kind of what that means. Re-engageable means basically that you can use push notifications. Like if the New York Times, for instance, if you were offline, now you're online, it gives you a push notification, hey, you're online again, there's some more news stories. It should do that, right? And apps do that, and progressive web apps do the same. And now we come to these other cool things, so linkable. And that's kind of what other apps cannot easily do. So basically, this means that I can give you a link, and then you can click on it, but it opens the app. So in this case, I said we are offline, right? If I click on this link now, it still loads a better Pocket.net because it works offline. And in this link was all the information encoded. So like even the hand is encoded, everything that I selected. So let's say you're kind of studying a hand and you want to share it with someone. You can just post that link, and whoever opens it has the same situation that you were looking at, right? You don't have to explain anything. It's like, okay, this is a hand, and so on. And that's kind of really cool because on the phone, it will actually open the app. It won't even go to the browser. It will know, oh, there's an app for this. So now we're going to talk about what's actually making all this possible. There's so many criteria that we have to fulfill, right? How do we actually make that happen? Well, what kind do we need? And probably the most important one is a service worker. So who has heard of service workers before? Okay, a lot of you. So basically, the name is a little bit misleading. It's actually not a worker in the sense, it's not like a web worker or anything. It's more like you're having a server in your browser. It's like you're having a proxy server right there. And any request that the page actually makes goes through your server kind of, and you can make the decision what you do with it. You can drop it on the floor. You can say, okay, I need to talk to the backend server, or maybe I have something in the cache that I can give you, or you can do whatever you want. So it's kind of like gives you a lot of power. And so what for instance, in the case for betterpoker.net, I basically cached the entire page. The first time you go there, it's not that big, like the JavaScript, not that much. I cache it in your browser or in your phone or whatever. So if I'm like in the mountains, it actually works. And it keeps me logged in and everything. So as I said, I travel a lot, and sometimes I might want to try something, and I don't have internet. It works, right? Because I cached the whole app. So basically, it has a lot of other features as well. It doesn't only support caching. You can do automatic updates, background sync. Like I said with the New York Times, for instance, you can do push notifications. And at this point, it's supported in Safari. It didn't used to be when I first gave this talk. It's kind of supported. Obviously, Apple has to be special. So, for instance, if you don't go to this page for like a few weeks, it will just say, okay, I'm going to delete this now. And then when you're offline and you want to use it, then it's not there anymore. That can happen. Another thing that they kind of, for security reasons, screwed up is, when you log in, I'm using OAuth, so it goes to the browser and does the OAuth part, and then it jumps back, right? Well, that works on Android. It doesn't work on iOS. Like, it just gets stuck in an endless loop. So you can't use the app on an iPhone and log yourself in, which kind of sucks. I hope they'll fix that. So a service worker, you can write it by hand, and probably if you if you kind of want to just play around with it and learn it, you probably should, because you can see everything that's happened. You can even debug. You could put breakpoints in a service worker and so on. But if you just want to get something done, Google brought out this a module called Workbox, and basically that has a bunch of kind of boilerplate code that you don't have to write anymore, which makes it really easy to set up your service worker quickly. And an important thing is that the service worker file kind of signals that something changed by its content changing. So if you have a list of files that you cached and the file names don't change, your service worker content doesn't change. Some people have a version in the service worker that they change. What I suggest instead is to use like proper cache busting, where basically your file names include the content hash. That's a good practice anyways. And then in your service worker file, now the file names also change, and then it updates. So let's look at some strategies that you could use for service workers. And these are basically strategies that Workbox includes. This one is still while revalidate. So what that means is if I'm requesting a resource, it will ask the service worker for it. The service worker will look if it's in the cache. And if it's still in the cache, it will say, OK, here it is. But it will still revalidate, meaning it will go to the network and say, oh, is there maybe also a newer version of this file, right? So it will fetch that, put that in the cache. The user doesn't see that until he goes to the page again, because now it just got updated in the cache, but the browser already has the old cache version, right? That's still well revalidate. Cache first just means that it's going to go to the cache first, and if it doesn't find it in the cache, it goes to the network. It's kind of like what we just looked at, except it doesn't do the update basically in the background. And network first is the other way around. It makes sense for New York Times, for instance. You want to look at the newest version, right? And only if you find out, oh, the user is not online or maybe has a really bad connection, that's when you say, OK, let's give it go from the cache. Network only is basically the way that browsers work today, right? It's as if you don't have a service worker. It just basically goes through to the network and comes back. And then we have cache only. I do not recommend that. I don't know why you would want to use that, because you're going to get probably users stuck in a specific version and never update from network. But it's still a strategy that's available. Another thing that is important for these progressive web apps is your web manifest. And basically, that's all about like how does your application get shown and how can it be used once it's installed as an application. So basically, it tells it a bunch of information. For instance, it tells it the name, the short name. The short name is important if your app is called something long. Then basically it will try to pick a short name. If you don't specify it, and it will be like ... something. It will be very bad, so you should specify one. And then you can specify, OK, it's a standalone display, but a bunch of things. You can specify the background colors, what the icon should look like, and so on. And then you have to include that in your header. So this is like just like saying, OK, where's my manifest? And then you just have to tell the browser that, OK, this is actually a web app. It's mobile web app capable. And obviously, again, Apple is special, so you have to put 2 tags because Apple wants its own tag. And then HTTPS, I already mentioned that your app is supposed to be secure. So you should use HTTPS. I mean, even for any web app that you publish today, you should use HTTPS. There's no excuse anymore to not to, given that Let's Encrypt makes it so easy. Anyone can get their own certificate without any problem. So then the responsiveness part, right? How do we solve this? How did I make this happen? When you resize, that things kind of change and so on. Well, there are 2 parts to this. The first one are CSS media queries, which make it really easy because you can say, OK, up to this width, use this part of the CSS. Up to that width, use the other one. So I can basically change the way things render. You can even target specific phone devices. So you can say, for instance, in the iPhone X case, the stupid nook on the top there, I needed to make sure that I don't render buttons up there, right? Or the matrix, you can't get there. You can't press it. So I had to say, OK, I had to find out with CSS if it's like an iPhone X, and then I basically put an X on margin. So there are basically exact media, and these slides will be online. So there are exact media queries, kind of like there's a whole collection of them. So for instance, this one targets the Google Pixel directly. Some arrangements you cannot do with CSS. So like for instance, when I showed the sidebar, it never makes sense on the phone, right? But that's not only CSS, right? I actually have to say, OK, render a pop-up versus a sidebar. So that stuff you solve in JavaScript. And I'm using Preact here. And it lends itself really well, React as well, to basically say, I'm going to have an event if my window resizes, and then the window dimensions are part of my state. And then when that state changes, well, then it re-renders everything. And so then it takes a different render path and maybe then adds sidebar instead. So far we learned the easy parts, right? Everything that kind of works. It's a lot of work to set this up, but it's straightforward. There's scaffolders that help you with it, like create React app, includes a service worker now. And then it's kind of, you can tweak it with CSS and JavaScript. Okay, but what about device functionality? That's where it gets tricky. So how about making it work? Like, I showed I have like a pop-up coming up if I press, or in the desktop if I right-click, and so on. How does it all work? So it should be easy, right? Touch events actually follow mouse events. Otherwise, all these older websites wouldn't work at all, right? They listen only to mouse events, and now the phones use them. So it should be easy, right? So for instance, but in this case, like a pop-up, right? I have to make sure, like, if you click here, or are you trying to scroll here? Or, and I got to make sure that you don't click through and do something to the underlying matrix. So for instance, like if I open this one, right, I want to be able to scroll this, but I also want to be able to click this, and so on. So it's a lot of possibilities. But then I can say, okay, well, prevent default so it doesn't go through. But if I do that on touch start, what does it do to click? Well, it kills click. Click, you won't get the click event anymore. So what does it, if I kill touch start, what does it do to scrolling? Well, scrolling breaks too. So I can't just say, okay, a user touched and now prevent default. It doesn't work. But then how do I know if the user was trying to scroll or was trying to like press? Maybe it's trying to hold it, or maybe it's trying to tap. I have no idea. So that's what you look like after a while dealing with this. And there are other fun things. So for instance, Android touch press fires context menu, which is basically like a right click, right? Well, iOS touch press fires nothing. Android double tap fires double click, right? So iOS double tap fires, wait for it, nothing. So if you kind of like try to use the mouse stuff and touch together, you look like this after a while. So you can't rely on double tap and push press to trigger these related mouse events. You have to. Well, we're offline, so this doesn't work. So this is a proof that we actually really offline. But there's something called HammerJS that would help you with this. Let me try if it loads down. So HammerJS trying to help you with this. There are other solutions, Sencha Touch. But I actually talked to some people that worked with this, and they looked at my app and they said, yeah, this is like too special. It's too custom. If these general solutions won't work. So many other of these solutions exist, but if you have very specific cases like I do, very complicated interactions, you have to basically do them yourself. And the way you do it, the way I did it anyways, I had them in the components, and then when I started seeing commonalities, like where I rewrite the same thing over and over, I started to pull things out. And I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm gonna have to race through this. But basically, the main important thing is that I'm treating mouse and touch events totally different. So I'm either saying the user is using a mouse or a trackpad, or the user is on a phone and is using touch. Obviously, that breaks for users that want to do like this on a touch screen and they want to use mouse and touch together. Well, I'm very sorry. But it's hard enough as it is. So basically what I'm saying here is like, if this is a touch device, I won't even like deal with mouse events at all. And then basically what I'm trying to do here is I'm using down, mouse move, and mouse up directly. And I'm trying to figure out after the fact if it's a click or whatever. So for instance, if it's a move, if the user is moving, obviously he's trying to scroll. So then there's no click potential anymore. Same for the touch. It's a little more complicated. These are all online, as I said. Don't have time to go into too much detail, but the main idea is like if the user moves just a little bit, he's not trying to scroll because it could happen when you touch, you move a little bit. So there's some tricky parts to it where I'm trying to figure out like if it's a click, if it's a double click, or a tab, a double tap, or a press. But all this code is in these slides. So another thing that was tricky was service workers. How much more time do I have? Okay, so I'm going to race through this. So one thing was annoying. Some things stopped waiting. I wanted the service worker to update right away and not wait for all the tabs to be closed. So that I needed to do that with skip waiting. So that was hard to find. Client's claim is another one. So basically, if you want your service workers to update immediately, and you don't, right, like for this app makes sense, you have to use these two lines. It took me like an evening to find out what these are. So that was it. Testing interactions, you use DevTools for responsiveness, but for like actually testing interactions, you want to use like what I showed here, some iPhone emulator and some Android emulator, or obviously like ideally on the real devices. The cool thing is that Android devices behave similarly, and if you have an iPod or an iPad and you don't have an iPhone, you're pretty good still because they also behave similarly. Then finally, you want to test your stuff with Lighthouse. So that allows you to say, how good is my PWA? It will basically give you a score, how good you're doing with all these things. Like we talked about accessibility earlier in the morning. Run that you can point it to your web page or locally. And one thing I wanted to say, this is like the whole don't give up brand. Like they all tell you it's easy, but it's not. It's all lies. Like all these technologies are new and they're actually not that easy to use as everyone tells you. So don't give up. It's more like that actually. Don't be discouraged. I took a lot of time for all this stuff to figure this out. Try to isolate the problem, so make sure your app can run in parts. So for instance, I can run the matrix by itself. I can run a bunch of stuff by itself. So debug closely. And finally, if you can't figure it out, just figure out, do I even need this for my app to just go out? And maybe just go out without that feature and then come back to it later. And then another thing, if you don't want to write the backend like me, Firebase is an option. If you just want to build like a web app real quick, like a mobile app. And this is it. These are the resources. They are online, or some of the PWAs. And then if you're interested in me programming, follow me on Lorenz on Twitter and on Twitch. I program there sometimes. If you're interested in betterpoker.net, follow betterpoker_net on Twitter. I have a Facebook page, and just try betterpoker.net. It's free. You can just sign up to get all the features. You get a month free. So thank you very much.